For the latest in strategic affairs, subscribe to our YouTube channel. Click the bell icon for updates. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh Revi. We're the media partners for Orca's Global Conference on New Sinology, and our guests today are Lucas Myers from the Wilson Center in Washington, D.C., and we have Professor Hideshi Tokuchi, who is the president of RIPS. Professor and Lucas, thank you so much for giving us time.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure listening to you during the conference as well. Professor, I just wanted to get you to elaborate a little bit more on what you spoke about, which is how does Japan see itself in the Quad, and what does Japan see as India's significant role?
Oh, Quad. First of all, the Quad is a very important partnership to achieve the concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific. And also, from a Japanese point of view, the Quad is a very important partnership to engage India with the U.S.-centered alliance relationship in the Asia-Pacific region, because the Japan and Australia are already staunch U.S. allies, and the relationship between Australia and Japan much closer to the level of alliance. So in my perspective, the weakest link with India. Of course, we clearly understand that the Quad is an alliance, and also, India remains autonomous, but it is very good to generate synergy of the U.S. alliance relationship and India's engagement.
Lucas, you spoke a lot about Pax Seneca versus Pax Americana, and you also went to elaborate. I think there were some questions on how many countries see both, if they see them as hegemons or potential hegemons, as hypocritical in their own ways. But if you just want to elaborate on where you think the world is headed.
I think at this point, great power competition between the United States and China is locked in. And from the U.S. perspective, this is a bipartisan consensus. And so at this point, I think we can all make long-term bets that this relationship is only going to continue to remain somewhat acrimonious. Structurally, I would say that this is really shaping up to be a competition between international orders, between what Washington calls the rules-based international order, and it's joined by Japan, India, Australia, the European countries in defending that order, versus what I would say a loosely aligned group of revisionist countries, China being the most powerful, but you can include Russia, North Korea, etc. within that, the dissatisfied grouping that hopes to overturn that order. And so what I would say what China is really advocating for in its rhetoric is this idea of a state-centric, development-centric model. But in practice, I think that would really means a sort of a return to traditional spheres of influence, predominance for larger countries in that system. And I think there's growing evidence of this. And this is partly why, or largely why, many countries like, say, the Philippines or Vietnam are more, aligning with the United States, especially in recent years, because of Chinese behavior that has shown that their rhetoric about the global South and how, we are a fellow global South country often falls short of in practice.
The Pax Seneca versus Pax Americana. Many countries, if you talk about America, of course, China is opposing that and wants to probably replace that. But both countries have opposition in a sense. That's what I was referring to later as maybe the hypocrisy that is seen.
And that's 100% one of the main issues facing the United States. And in many cases, the United States has to adapt the rules-based order to incorporate new voices, and particularly India's. I think this is a huge, issue for the United States. If it only defends a status quo that many countries, especially in the global South, are increasingly dissatisfied with, it'll not be as attractive as it could be. And so I think going forward, this is a challenge for the United States to be able to adapt a bit and actually address some of these hypocrisies. For instance, one issue that was raised at the conference was the idea of India on the UN permanent Security Council as a member, and that's something the U.S. has issued support for.
You look at Taiwan, there have been a lot of statements from Japan leadership. Reports this month suggesting that for the first time you'll probably be putting in a serving, uniformed, de facto military attaché in Taiwan. I don't know whether that is correct or not. But just wanted you to talk about the evolution of Japan's policy in case there is some kind of aggressive action that China would take in the future, and how that has changed.
You mean China to Taiwan, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Well, the Taiwan is a very important partner for Japan for a long time, and also Japan is geographically very close to Japan, only 110 kilometers between Japan and Taiwan. And, Taiwan is a democracy, changing the government after elections. So since 1990s, so it's a full-fledged democracy. So, and also Taiwan is a very important country strategically, because Taiwan is located just between the East China Sea and South China Sea. And Taiwan has, Miyako Strait on the north and Bashi Strait on the south. And these two straits are very important exits for China to advance to the seas, particularly the Pacific Ocean. So therefore, defense security of Taiwan is very important, of course, for Taiwan itself, but also for Japan and the entire world. So that's why the many diplomatic documents, including G7's document and also Japan-U.S. documents, and even European documents such as the EU's document, refer to the importance of the peace and stability of the Taiwan Strait for the peace of the international community. So it is not just about Taiwan, it's a global issue. And as I said, Japan is very close to Taiwan. So therefore, Japanese efforts to defend Japan itself will contribute to the stability of peace and stability of Taiwan, because Japan hosts more than 50,000 U.S. troops on its own soil. Therefore, if Japan helps the U.S. military forces operate from the Japanese territory, then it will contribute to the peace of Taiwan and the Taiwan Strait in case. So I think, in my personal view, that's what the Japanese government is doing right now.
Look, if you want to add to anything that press says, you're most welcome. But I also want to get your thoughts on a multipolar world versus what analysts say is the new Cold War, Cold War 2.0, India and many other countries looking at multi-alignment, strategic autonomy, minilaterals. How do you see all of that in the current context, and what trajectory is the world moving?
I would say that we're looking at an increasingly complex picture of competition. I think multipolarity is the trend. I think if you look at the changes in the global economy, the balance of power is shifting. We're looking at multiple great powers really competing. I don't think we're going to see a bipolar system in the way that we did during the U.S.-Soviet Cold War. It's a bit more muddied, and part of that is this non-alignment sort of trend among many countries, including in India, and multi-alignment, right? And I think going forward, we're going to see, especially in places like Southeast Asia or the Pacific, countries will attempt to balance between, say China or the United States by pursuing relationships with a variety of other outside powers. And really the idea here is they're attempting to avoid getting sucked into sort of the bilateral U.S.-China tensions. I think over time, that'll be a difficult position for some countries to maintain, especially as say China becomes more powerful in its immediate neighborhood. I'm thinking of countries like the Philippines and Vietnam, and we're already seeing them move a bit closer to the United States in response. But long term, I do not think a bipolar order is what we're looking at. This is a Cold War between the United States and China. I think that's an accurate phrasing. But it's not the Cold War 2.0. It's something different. It's more multipolar, and it's going to be a bit more shifting. Alliances and partnerships will shift as national interests dictate and countries attempt to make the most of what's going to be a tense situation.
Professor, Japan faces a curious, significant threat, nuclear threat from the three autocratic countries, Russia, North Korea, and China itself. Prime Minister Kishida has been talking about, first was the increase in the defense budget from 1% to 2%, different strategic papers that have been involved. Also talking about strike capability on other bases. Now, you spoke about the Americans in Japan, if need be, and if they are allowed to, in case they needed against Taiwan. But what is Japan planning in terms of when you're talking about strike capability?
Well, there are several points about Japanese acquisition of the so-called counter-strike capability. Particularly North Korea and China have a large number of missiles, ballistic missiles, particularly in their own arsenals. And, the Japanese government has been pouring greatest efforts to strengthen its missile defense capability. But the Japanese are afraid of saturate capability of those countries, particularly North Korea, in the short term. So therefore, it is not a good option for Japan to depend on missile defense capability alone. So therefore, the combination of attack capability and defense capability, that will be a wiser option for Japan. And by doing so, Japan will be a dependable ally of the United States. So then I think that the credibility of U.S. extended deterrence to the security of Japan will be increased, I think.
Because you also spoke about the BRI, and in particular, I think you an expert on what's happening in Myanmar, or Burma, as it was called. And you were outlining how, despite the US and India having made different positions on the current dispensation in Myanmar, and possibly it is because we share a border with Myanmar. But what are the options that India and the US have to, if not coordinate, but at least have a similar kind of strategy to deny or push the Chinese out of BRI in Myanmar?
You rightly point out that the policies are quite different, but at the same time, you can look at the Quad statements that have come out as just shared. The U.S. and India are both partaking and signing off on these joint statements, and they continue until, including this week, from the foreign minister at the UNGA, that they support a return to a democratic path, inclusive dialogue, end of violence, release of political prisoners, and these are all goals that the India and the U.S. can broadly share on this issue.
Sanctions, we are engaging with the military junta,
and that's where the challenge is. And I think from my perspective as an American, I would argue that India could do more to support the pro-democracy movement. I think this is
we got burnt the last time in 1988.
But this is the first real chance, and this is the thing that I would say is different from 1988 or previous efforts to overturn military rule. The military is fundamentally weakened on the security sector. I mean, you're looking at serious tactical deficiencies, and there are opportunities here to really push this forward and actually make a change in Myanmar for the better. I think this is the most inclusive movement we've seen in decades. Genuinely, I would say that the pro-democracy movement, broadly defined, has a buy-in that we didn't see in those previous instances of 1988, for instance. And they've made more progress. And I think broadly, things that the U.S. and India can do are, from the U.S. side, we've recently implemented some sanctions on, say, aviation fuel to attempt to at least limit the junta's ability to continue its airstrikes, which are its main military advantage over the resistance forces. I would also argue that just keeping the door open to the opportunities of the resistance to engage diplomatically. Recently, the United States has continued to meet with the NUG, for instance, and I think these are just opportunities we can help support them. That doesn't mean arms. That doesn't mean those sorts of more escalatory actions. But I think it's more so giving them a chance to really change their own future. And I think the people of Myanmar still, by and large, support this resistance movement.
You talked about the synergy between your defense and counter-strike abilities in conjunction with the U.S. if need be vis-a-vis Taiwan. Where is the debate on Japan going nuclear within Japan? Not the American umbrella, but you have the technological capability, there's no doubt about that, especially in light of history in Hiroshima and Nagasaki.
Well, generally speaking, the Japanese public support for the possibility of Japan's own nuclearization is always low, around 10% support for that. Even when the North Koreans conducted nuclear test explosions in 2017. Of course, as you correctly mentioned, the Japanese memory of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, that's a very important factor. But even setting aside from that aspect, strategically, I think that Japan's own nuclearization is a bad option because, the Japan doesn't have strategic depth. So therefore, if Japan is attacked by nuclear weapons, particularly nuclear missiles, then Japan cannot have enough capability to retaliate with the nuclear weapons. So, taking balance with Chinese missiles, Chinese nuclear weapons, Russian nuclear weapons, that's almost impossible. The only option would be submarine-based capability. But in order to acquire that option, Japan needs U.S. support. But if Japan decides to have nuclear weapons, it means that nuclear weapons will be proliferated. But it is against our goal. Non-proliferation of nuclear weapons is very much important because, if nuclear weapons are more proliferated, it will decrease the credibility of nuclear deterrence. So, I think that most of the Japanese experts believe that Japan's own nuclearization is a bad option.
Understood. And when you're talking about submarine deterrence, there were some circles who were talking about JAWS also, to add to AUKUS. But again, when you're talking about balancing in South Asia, I think another country you focus on is Vietnam. Did you explain what's happening in Vietnam vis-a-vis China, President Biden going there straight up in G20, reported arms deals? India is also engaging militarily with Vietnam. Reports being floating around about the BrahMos supersonic missile.
I think Vietnam's a great example of this sort of multi-alignment, non-alignment concept in the new, era of great power competition. The U.S. recently signed this comprehensive strategic partnership with Hanoi, and this is a huge elevation. Many people expected strategic partnership, which is a step below what we got. And that's a big sign, putting us on par with Russia and China in the Vietnamese diplomatic hierarchy. But what I would say here is this is not outright alignment with the United States. Vietnam is very careful to continue, making visits to Beijing and working with China. And this is very sensible from the Vietnamese perspective, I would say, because at the end of the day, they are on China's doorstep. They fought a war in 1979. They have the South China Sea dispute. And so what Vietnam is attempting to do is maintain outreach to a variety of great powers. The Russians, it still continues to buy most of its arms from them. Obviously, with India now, it's continuing to ramp up defense ties. And with the United States, and really what it's looking to do is avoid exposure and dependence on China and attempt to broaden its access to a variety of actors. And really, this is a very careful balancing act that countries like Vietnam are playing between standing up to China, but also not triggering some sort of coercive action that could be, seriously detrimental. And as Vietnam experienced, actual military action is on the table.
Professor Tokuchi, again, I think you addressed it in one of your two talks during conference, or maybe it was somebody else. But when you look at Taiwan again, and how the comparison between the U.S. and Poland vis-a-vis what's happening in Ukraine and Russia and the U.S. and Japan vis-a-vis what's happening in Taiwan. And you had elaborated a little bit more, but if you want to give us your thoughts on that. And by the way, of course, Poland and Ukraine are not really on the best of terms currently.
Well, Japan's Prime Minister Kishida often says that Ukraine today may be East Asia tomorrow. And of course, he doesn't specifically mention Taiwan, but everybody think about Taiwan when they heard Mr. Kishida say so. According to the public opinion poll conducted soon after the Russian invasion of Ukraine, the majority of the Japanese public believe that the Russian invasion of Ukraine affected the East Asian security environment seriously. So therefore, the Japanese public are concerned about the possibility of China's use of force against Taiwan. But I do not necessarily think so, because, if we look at Ukraine, the Ukrainians are fighting very well. And the international support, particularly the Western Bloc support, the United States and NATO countries and other like-minded countries strongly, support Ukraine. So therefore, probably the Chinese are thinking twice about their own willingness to use force against Taiwan. But it is only short-term consideration. In the long run, that China will be much more prepared to use force against Taiwan if needed. China never abandoned the option of use force against Taiwan in order to annex it. So therefore, whether or not China will use force against Taiwan right now or not, our side should keep vigilant and also prepared to maintain the status quo over there.
There is school of thought which says that America is actually finding a proxy war against Russia to the last Ukrainian, but that's probably a subject we can deal with later. What are your thoughts more, because you spoke about it again during the conference, on how the India, US and other partners and allies can keep the Malacca dilemma alive for China?
So I would say that if you look at a map, Chinese geography is quite unfavorable to Beijing. They are surrounded to the east by U.S. security architecture, long-standing U.S. bases there. To the south, India is a rival. I mean, in Russia is not very reliable, I would say, to the north, and now is incredibly weakened. And to the west, you have Afghanistan and Central Asia, and so China is actually quite hemmed in if you look at it that way. And the Malacca Strait is a source of vulnerability. They import 80% of their seaborne oil via that route, and so they look at that as with some consternation that a foreign blockade could really disrupt their access to really critical energy supplies. And so, in their strategic thinking, they're attempting to bypass this issue by pursuing routes through, Myanmar, Pakistan, and attempting to, a pipeline with Russia, right? And how we can keep that alive and add some deterrence in the Chinese strategic, calculus on, say, Taiwan, is making sure that none of these countries that China is working with fully side with the Chinese. Keeping them in a neutral stance would be very helpful. There's been some work recently talking about, these ports that China's attempting to procure, for the potentially of dual use implications. But in the event of a war, let's look at the Sri Lanka example. Hambantota, is a Chinese company, now has it. But in a war, is Sri Lanka really, going to be siding with China and allowing them free access to this, if at the risk of completely, throwing relations with India and the United States out the table? I wouldn't think so. And the key is to keep that there, is to keep engaging with Sri Lanka and provide them some alternatives economically, politically, et cetera, in order to keep China from having them as an ally. Because really, China has no allies right now. They have only partners. And if you look at the partners, none of them are overly, stable or reliable countries. And so I think that's an advantage that the U.S. and its coalition broadly have against China, and I think we should keep it.
Dr. Smiles and Professor Tokuchi, absolutely appreciate you both giving us time, sharing your expertise and experience with us. Thank you again.
Thank you very much.
And for our viewers, do give us feedback on this interview and any other topics or analysts that you would like to have on the show. You can get the latest by following our social media handles for articles that we put up on our website or interviews like this on our YouTube channel. There's also a QR code that's on your screen if you'd like to support us financially. This is StratNews Global. I'm Amitabh.